Welcome to our session, Human First Digital Strategy for the New Era of Healthcare. I'm Ben Cash, the CEO of Reason One.
And I'm Dean Browell, Chief Behavioral Officer for Feedback.
So, why should you care about Human First Digital Strategy? Why does this matter? Well, first reason is that change is a feature, not a bug. You all likely had a digital strategy and COVID happened, road closed, detour, more detours. Or maybe you didn't have a digital strategy before, but now the changes in consumer behavior and the acceleration of patient technology are making it hard not to have one. And to boot, retailers like CVS and Walmart are trying to eat your lunch. So it's not enough to respond to change, you have to get out in front of it. The second reason is that human behavior is at the heart of change management. This is true both internally and externally. Digital strategies are effective when they're both adapting to changes in consumer behavior and when they're shifting your team's behavior. Humans are complex, right? And change does not happen without them. So when consumer behavior and market forces are changing faster than you can, a dangerous gap develops. So our session today is about minding and bridging that gap. So we're going to take you through minding the digital gap. I'll run through that. My colleague Dean is going to look at the research gap. Together, we're going to talk about bridging both gaps and then talk about some next steps and things you can do to get started. So let's talk about minding the digital gap. So given that change is not going anywhere ever, minding the digital gap isn't just about having the right digital strategy, it's about having a roadmap to help you navigate that strategy. So for our discussion today, just to set the stage, a digital roadmap is a 1 to 3 year plan that aligns stakeholders on priorities, objectives, and budget to achieve your goals. It's about doing the right things for the right reasons in the right order. And it helps you map your digital strategy to a pragmatic, deadline-driven backlog that's achievable. And it helps you plan for the unexpected, which, as we know, is par for the course these days. So ultimately, this is about creating order out of chaos. So whether your roadmap has been derailed or worse, that you don't have one, no shaming today, it can feel like an endless game of whack-a-mole, especially in today's environment. And it can be tempting to go about it as business as usual, continuing to not have or reset your strategy, taking projects as they come, focus on just keeping everything alive and working, because that seems a lot easier than taking the time to create a multi-year roadmap or even an annual plan. But that does come at a cost. It's obvious what can happen when you don't have a plan. You've got reactive projects that feel like stop and go traffic, budget overruns because things weren't properly planned and scoped, and even more staff burnout, if that's possible, because of the chaos, right? Which is not great nowadays with the Great Resignation. So, but the most corrosive thing that often happens is siloing. People go rogue and off-brand, and without proper governance and the right set of tools, they're just going to do what feels right to them, whether it's correct or not. And unless there's consensus and governance on the right platforms, you could easily find yourself with a mess of unapproved tech that's poorly integrated, resulting in siloed constituent data. And as we've probably all experienced, one-off Franken sites, patent pending, that take on a life of their own, right? Does that sound familiar? So how do we get on the road? Getting started or restarted can be challenging, but it's not possible, not impossible. Whether you do it all in-house or you have a partner to guide you, everyone's got to get out and push a little bit. So here are 5 things that will make this less of an uphill push. So number 1, got to get the right people on the bus. At a high level, you need 3 general groups involved at different stages. First, you got to have leadership, right? That strategic context and their buy-in. Second, you need stakeholders. This is Marcom, physicians, HR, legal, all those stakeholders that really have an impact and a voice. And then also IS and IT. They provide context for infrastructure needs, interdependencies of platforms, integrations, and often compliance issues. But here's the thing. The point of a roadmap isn't to end up with a document, it's to foster conversations and alignment among these groups and keep those lines of communication open. The second thing you can do is align with corporate strategy. Seems obvious, but it bears asking, how is your corporate strategy reacting to and in line with drivers like consumerization and disruption in the healthcare industry? As the most visible piece of marketing your system has, your web properties need to stay competitive. Things you might want to ask, how does your digital strategy align with your market positioning? If academic partnerships are part of your mandate, how does it serve those audiences? How will it scale with your acquisition strategy? Or how will digital help support growing your center of excellence? Third thing is gather your data, because what gets measured gets managed, and understanding where you've been ultimately helps you eliminate where you're going. So you want to gather everything you can. That's Google Analytics, SEO, campaign level analytics, heat maps, and a crazy egg and hot jar, whatever you got, get your hands on it. It helps you understand how your content's performing and what other elements like user experience might be a factor. And most important, this is going to give you visibility into your patient acquisition rate and how your website is helping to funnel patients into more specialized levels of care. And again, here's another thing. You have to look for the gaps in your data. Bringing in the right tools and tracking are a key part of a successful digital roadmap. And of course, Dean is going to expand on behavioral data to make sure we're putting humans at the center of your strategy. Number 4, you got to identify the table stakes. What are the things that absolutely have to happen? These are the business as usual projects and the day-to-day tasks and deliverables. And lastly, you got to daydream a little bit. What's around the corner? Where's the untapped ROI, right? Is that finally doing personalization the right way? Is it an optimized recruiting experience? Or is it that rebrand that you've always dreamed of doing? Whatever it is, a digital roadmap can help you manifest it. So it takes a lot of mapping to build a roadmap. And one of those things you're going to do, or a number of those things you're going to do are several tactics to develop that map. So first, all of the data gathering you did collectively. And you'll see some of the different things that we're talking about here with the tech and infrastructure, UX, UI, analytics, SEO, et cetera. We then want to go into a qualitative strategic analysis and research, right? Looking at the insights, review and validate, revamp the existing digital strategy, update your personas, user journey mapping, et cetera. And collaborative workshops that help define objectives, priorities, and the initial roadmap. So now let's talk about planning for the right journey, the right roadmap. So when you're kicking off a roadmap exercise, 2 of the most important questions to address are how long is the journey we're planning and what level of fidelity do we need in our itinerary? So when you're road mapping for a health system, you often need a dual strategy. First, a detailed operational focus plan for the short term and a bigger picture roadmap that can serve as your North Star, aligning your digital strategy with the long-term strategic goals of the organization. So let's take a look at what a 1-year operational roadmap looks like, right? The majority of what's in this are the things you already know need to happen. The tasks and ongoing initiatives that are already built into your year-to-year operations model, capital projects, ones that are already funded or already underway. And the remainder of the roadmap should also provide room for incremental innovations and emerging needs. Finally, for all those things, you'll want to adjust and prioritize to ensure you can focus on the things that absolutely must happen and the things that are generating the most ROI. So what are the key elements of a 1-year roadmap? First, there's a detailed prioritized backlog. There's an outline of who is accountable for what, right? Things don't get done if there's not accountability. Clarity on budget and resourcing for operational activities and projects, and a timeline that plots out the various tasks and projects that your team needs to complete and that illustrates any dependencies. In contrast, developing a multi-year roadmap is about taking stock of your current state, diving into what's working and what isn't, ensuring that your digital strategy aligns with any larger changes in your organization's business strategy, and accounting for more seismic shifts in things like stakeholder and audience needs, business operations, digital and technology landscapes, which are always changing. And so that multi-year roadmap includes an updated, overarching digital strategy, a high-level timeline that plots out the major initiatives and milestones that you anticipate completing over a multi-year period. This is things like, website redesigns, platform migration. In one case, we actually had a client whose roadmap helped them navigate a merger, right? Integrating systems, teams, digital properties, all of it, right? Would not have happened without a roadmap. And lastly, you need a high-level, long-range resourcing and budget forecasting to address anticipated changes in team skills and capacity, your outsourcing requirements, and expenditures for capital projects, right? So one of the important principles for any digital roadmap is the 70-20-10 rule. It's a balancing act, right? You want to ensure your core predictable operational needs are taken care of while still leaving room for innovation and larger transformative investments. First are the must-haves, right? 70% of your budget goes towards known projects and business as usual stuff, things that generate clear ROI for the business and that keep the lights on. Next things are those needle movers, right? This is 20% of your roadmap that should focus on incremental innovations that, while not guaranteed, could have the potential to set your organization apart from your peers and competitors. And that final 10% is reserved for exploring longer term, bigger and bolder moves. These are your BHAGs, if you will, your big, hairy, audacious goals, right? This is blue sky, research and transformational change territory. Got to be spending some time for that. So what does the end of this journey look like? Let's say you're on the other end, right? Your upfront investments in road mapping ensure that you got buy-in from all your key stakeholders. Your CEO signed off on it. Hallelujah, huzzah. Your team was aligned on your objectives, operation plan, and KPIs. And no matter the twists and turns, you had the capacity to adapt and adjust when needed and still achieve your key goals. So I'm sure you all have a lot of gaps in your own digital roadmaps, whether it's tech or content or personalization. And hopefully we get a chance to talk outside of this recorded session here to answer those questions and talk about your gaps. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Dean to talk about minding the behavioral gap.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about the kinds of things that even we might typically see at feedback. We'll tell you a little bit more about what we do from a market research standpoint, but let me tell you one of the many reasons why folks end up understanding that they may not be in the place that they should be in terms of understanding their audiences. I mean, first off, just the fact that you still might be using segmentation and personas that you've developed prior to the pandemic, which, spoiler alert, everyone has changed dramatically enough behavior-wise that needs to not be happening. Or for that matter, that you've created your personas internally from truly anecdotal, like as in, well, it's sort of how we know these audiences, how we think we know these audiences, or worse, you've created them based on basically yourself and how you use the internet. And that's always a little bit dangerous. Or as we often see, could be maybe you've got some personas from Forrester that did for your organization for an awful lot of money a long time ago. And for that reason alone, you just can't seem to let go of them. That's one of the biggest issues. So we still see people using these kinds of personas from these kinds of sources all the time. And honestly, the really worst one is the one that's the most common. And that's the fact that often we're building a new website based on, the data from the old website. From the people that we've already captured and from people that used a website so bad that we want to replace it. So my particular perspective and how I tend to think about things really is in this much more academic angle of loving behavior in the past, loving to see then how that behavior has changed right now currently and how it might be, progressing in the future. And that's really how I see myself as this kind of Marty McFly character that wants to look at personas and behavioral data from a much larger continuum than just, say, the data you might have had on the old website. But let's look at how they actually behave. Generational differences is really where I've got my start from a background in research. Still scratch that itch. Have a book on Generation X in healthcare, which we're dealing with aging parents. We're dealing with taking care of our own kids and our own bodies are falling apart. So Gen X is really the triple threat. And that's a different talk altogether, but just to say we still scratch that generational itch and look at those personas through the same lenses. And if you like 80s music, there's a great playlist on Spotify and Apple Music as well. But let's talk about digital ethnography and how they can help these kinds of personas and really start to get at and hopefully open up a little bit of your mind of how this can interact with what Ben's been talking about from a roadmap perspective. First off, digital ethnography is incredibly valuable, if nothing else, from the standpoint of it's going to tell you what people are saying unprompted. That's very different than what you might get from surveys, right? Surveys are great at telling you what is happening. They're not great at telling you why. That's what we really want to get at, is that much more complete picture of what do people actually say out in the wild, online, to one another, to peers, without being prompted, and to notice where those gaps are. My favorite, soapbox lately has been NPS scores. Would you recommend this brand? Well, that's what you would ask on a survey. I don't want to know, would you recommend this brand? I want to know, do you actually act on it? And that's the big difference that I think we can fill here. And I think really understand then why that behavioral data is so important, to see those gaps. So to give you a sense of what we look at from an ethnographic perspective online, it's this idea of, yes, it's social listening, but I get hung up on that sometimes because people define social media differently. So let me blow out that definition for you and really say it is both what you probably are thinking as social, those large channels that we would call surface behavior, as well as much deeper channels as well, like forums and message boards. And in healthcare, they are crucially important from the standpoint of condition-specific message boards and things like that. So let me give you a solid example of what I'm getting at between this difference between surface and deeper behavior that we can observe. First off, with Facebook, and I just love picking on Mark Zuckerberg, so enjoy this moment of, especially when he decided to cook out for 7 hours and live stream it and say the word smoked meats over and over again. But let's take Facebook, for example. How someone who's been diagnosed with breast cancer talks on Facebook tends to be in a very specific way based on how we've observed things and much of the research we've done over the last 13 years. For example, it isn't data we want to write off, but it's data we want to put in the right context. When they're on Facebook, they're talking to friends and family, and they might be talking about what they've been through, what they need, maybe thanking for some of the support, requesting more. It's going to be a hodgepodge, but it's going to be very specific based on the context of the people who are on that channel. Again, we want to categorize that, and we do when we do our research. But we also take a look at much deeper channels, such as breastcancer.org. What you're seeing here are not just 4 different posts from 4 different women. These are the signatures at the bottom of posts for 4 different women on breastcancer.org. Already you can see that even when they just say, hey, how you doing today? This is appearing at the bottom, and this is more information than they would ever post on Facebook, for example. Again, it's not to say we don't want to look at what they're doing on the larger surface channels, but we want to put it in context with what they're doing when they actually get in a virtual room full of peers and can talk about what they're going through and really talk about it in a much deeper fashion. So this is the kind of behavior that we're saying that can really, really help you. So one other really important point to make, let's take Jane Goodall, our North Star from an anthropological standpoint, and say, like Jane, we don't touch the monkeys. We are just observing. We're not prompting answers. We're not interviewing people. We just want to see, how do these people get together? How are their behaviors like? How they talk about hospitals, how they talk about their physician, their treatment journey, the whole 9 yards. And it's super important because it's going to fill in data gaps that we don't normally have. So I want to illustrate some of those gaps. And specifically, let's just take this and let's just use this as a very bare bones, let's say, customer journey, if you will. And you can replace any part of this with anything that you'd like. When I talked from philanthropy standpoint at University of Richmond and talking to nonprofits, you could use this for everything from asking for money for a foundation to recruiting volunteers. This for you could be, patients coming in through the door of any type. But the point is that let's look at this through the perspective of the consumer, not just our perspective in terms of the touch points that we have. The consumer looks at this in lots of different ways. First off, they have to be activated. They have to know that you exist, right? They could have seen a billboard, maybe with your ER wait times. They could have seen, everything from an ad in from a digital placement, or they just know about you from hearing from other people. You have to be activated, and then they might do some research. That when I say research, that may not mean, super deep. It could just be, I'm doing some homework. Shopping, meaning I've narrowed it down to 2 choices. Conversion, meaning I've decided to make that appointment, right? Or, could be point of sale for signing up for something. It could be, again, with it donating money to a foundation, means that conversion point. And then last but not least, advocacy. And what you can see here on this screen is how your typical tactics might fall into the different components of the segment. Again, you're not driving this. This is when they have the wheel, right? But you can kind of understand how this plays out. And a couple of notes here. Search, for example, and activation means I'm putting in heart doctor and seeing what comes up. Search and research would be me putting in a doctor's name, a physician's name that I've maybe been recommended or I found in my activation search to even know that there's somebody to contact, or it could be a facility name. The point is I'm actually researching it based on now I have a knowledge of an entity that I'm pursuing a little bit more information on. That's why I'm calling that research. And just to separate that then from quote unquote shopping, meaning I'm narrowing it down to 2. And this all could take, minutes, it could take days. Bariatric surgery, this could take 7 years before they have the moments that put them over to actually finally converting and becoming a patient. Here's the problem though. Where do we typically get the data from? Well, typically we're making decisions on post-conversion data. For example, I mentioned those personas, right? From a website perspective, that we often are just making up personas based on traffic of the old website you'd like to replace. That's a great example of this. You're using data only from one end of this spectrum, the people who have already converted, that have already visited your website. And again, remember, this is the website you want to replace. But also things like, post-transaction surveys, right? Like when any of us go to CVS and the ribbon dancer receipt that ends up showing up afterwards. This is where we tend to get a lot of data. It's not bad, but let's put it into context of what we're getting. Another place we get data is on the front end, right? Focus groups, general surveys. In other words, just things that are happening on that front end. But what you can already tell now, if you look at this through that consumer lens of this journey, what we're missing is the middle. And it's this part, that the research techniques like digital ethnography can help you flesh out what is their full journey. When I mentioned that breastcancer.org example, in there, by listening in breastcancer.org, you can find out an awful lot about their journey, how they're researching, what are they narrowing it down to, what are they looking for, how do they talk about their treatment, how do they talk about post-treatment, do they return and keep talking to the community? That's all stuff that you're going to get to help fill out the full journey. So then you're not over-relying on 2 ends of the scale and not getting anything about the middle of how they're actually behaving, because that's going to inform a much better digital roadmap. So think about what your gaps are. What is it you don't know? Are your personas stale or old, or for that matter, just to go back to my generational differences, are they too built towards generations? For example, are you still using a persona just called millennials? You kind of just mean Gen Z right now, not necessarily taking into account the fact that millennials are over 40. So point being, we often have lots of behavioral gaps of really understanding someone's behavior, and we have a tendency to gloss over that. They could be really useful and can be really important to take these into account when you're building a newer and better website and are seeing where it could go in the future.
So let's talk about bridging that gap, that digital and research gap. So this actually came about with Dean and I because we work in a lot of the same clients. We saw some similar challenges, and some conversation sparked. I think reason one, we like many agencies take a user-centric approach, and we do extensive research to base those things on. And we talk to stakeholders. We get our hands on all the data we can. And we also test and optimize, right? But that's still a data-only approach, right? We wanted to go beyond those things and beyond the data and the assumptions, and we learned about Dean's approach, and it filled that gap so well. And it's more about being human-centric than it is user-centric, if you will, right? And so we started collaborating on some projects and clients, and from that collaboration, the chocolate and peanut butter, if you will, something really great came about. And it's what we want to share today, our ideas for how you can bridge these gaps together. And it did look a little something like this. You're dating yourself if you recognize this commercial, of course. But it really is two great strategies that work better together. And to boil it down, it really is about that we've got to go beyond common assumptions and practices, move to behavioral insights that then lead to action, right? Because as we said, stakeholders and analytics, it gives us the what, but it does not give us the why. And if we learn an actionable insight, then the roadmap process gives us the framework and the opportunity to actually put it into practice, right? Don't let an insight die in the vine just because you don't have a way to action it. So when we start in this process together, you first got to build a strong foundation for change. Change management can be disruptive, really unsettling, and coming out the other side, it means before you do anything, you've got to build that foundation, right? And our roadmap foundation includes 4 key steps. So first, you've got to work closely with your key stakeholders to frame that problem and establish a clear business case for the project, because you want to achieve buy-in, alignment, and most importantly, sometimes budget approval. Number 2, you perform that ethnographic audience research, right? Bring out your Jane Goodalls and your Dean Browells. And you do also a comprehensive audit of your digital properties and processes, business objectives, competitive landscape, and obstacles to success. 3, you've got to codify an integrated digital strategy and prioritize a backlog to hit critical milestones and your transformational goals. And lastly, you want to establish a clear project plan that includes budget, timeline, protocols, and those roles and responsibilities that help make it possible. So, but that's not where the work stops, right? That's actually where the work begins, because that you build on top of that foundation. And if there's one big takeaway, it's that successful digital roadmaps have a plan, not the plan, right? Change is unpredictable, and you must create regular lookup points, right? To assess how it's going. And you're going to adjust based on internal and external factors. For annual roadmaps, you might make quarterly reviews a part of your planning cycle. For your long-term roadmap, it might be revisiting once a year and revising as needed. It's a pretty standard approach for most roadmaps. What's different with our Reese's integrated approach is that real human behavior must be incorporated into your decision-making and lookup points. First, we rediscover those behaviors to see what's changed, and we assess other forms of data and KPIs. Then we update our strategy, we reprioritize our backlog, and we get it done. Dean, you want to take over here?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've done this for a lot of different clients, but for like different parts of this. I mean, as we mentioned, we've really been at this for about a year in terms of really fitting this together in the right way. But the good news is we have lots of examples of how these insights can turn into great elements and tactics and even inform whole strategies from over the number of years that we've all been working. And so, like I said, with feedback, we've got 13 years. So what we're going to do is kind of really give you some kind of popcorn ideas of how this kind of goes in practice. So for example, how a particular element, that we might find insight-wise and what you might do about it in terms of an action. So first off, we're going to talk a little bit about personas and personalization, and really just kind of, again, popcorn a couple of ideas of things we found and show you how that turns into action on the site. So first off, let's talk about language, okay? And we've got some, I can't tell you how many things around language and messaging that we've found over the years with different insights and different behaviors, but let me just give you a couple of examples. One of my favorites is We've done some work for the Vision Council on low vision. So low vision, for those of you that may know, is a very specific diagnosis. Like we're talking like capital L, capital V, low vision. The problem is literally no one ever types that into a search bar. I mean, the only people who actually know what that is are people who have been diagnosed with it, to which point you've already gone to an optometrist, ophthalmologist, whoever it is, that, and even your general practitioner in some cases. Point being, the people who actually have low vision, what they put into a search is blurry vision. So just even something as basic as that. Another one specific to like different conditions is a great example too. Chronic kidney disease. No one who has chronic kidney disease who talks in communities online spells that out. They always say CKD. Every community for that, always utilizing that kind of short acronym. And similarly, and I know this is tough to break internally, but absolutely no one who's been diagnosed with cancer talks to anyone else using the word oncology. They might have to say that when they're talking about a department or something, but for the most part, they're just saying cancer. So just as an example of some of the, some of the language insights that you might find behaviorally, and then some ideas of maybe what to do about it. Ben.
Yeah, so phenomenal insights, right? And oftentimes we learn these things and we're like, how do we action that? We've already got other priorities, et cetera. And so these are actually very easy to action, right? And the kind of thing you could do in one of your quarterly reviews and update your quarterly backlog. So, first and foremost, just going to update the copy on those relevant pages to reflect more authentic language. Speak like your patients and consumers are speaking. You can also tag pages with alternate words and abbreviations like CKD for more relevant search results. In some cases, if someone types in something very specific, rather than giving them search results, why not take them directly to that landing page, right? Get them what they're looking for. And also, most importantly here, you can create new personalization groups based on the usage of these terms, right? Just like Dean said, someone who's using blurry vision has not been diagnosed yet. Someone who's using low vision might have been diagnosed. And you're going to treat a prospective patient and a caregiver very differently. So let's not treat everybody the same. Let's create those personalized groups.
So
right.
Location matters. As my mentor used to always quote a philosopher and saying, geography is fate. We have absolutely seen that happen from a behavioral standpoint. And I can't even tell you how much when we've done persona validation that what used to be a persona that was just called millennials could even be different based on millennials on one side of a river versus another. One example I'd love to give is Arkansas Children's. So Arkansas Children's, an incredible organization that covers the whole state of Arkansas, not just Little Rock where they're based. The thing with them, it's just an important thing to remember is just, first off, this is a state that just has an incredible variety of both geographical components, as well as just how Arkansas Children's can serve each part of the state being very different. When we've done work for them, for example, we might take a service line, like say neurology, and really map out what is the experience like for a parent that has a kid who's neurodivergent or a very specific list of conditions, and be able to map out how does their life totally different, both in terms of their support, even their access to docs, and maybe even just something down to just wait times for docs for just being able to treat that child. And how it can vary wildly from Northeast Arkansas versus Little Rock, or for that matter, Northeast who has to maybe drive to Little Rock, then compared to say Northwest Arkansas. For those of you who don't know, Northwest Arkansas is like a different country compared to the rest of Arkansas, thanks to Walmart and whatnot. But it means you have a really large variety of both availability and access to care, as well as just complete experiences. And so knowing that can mean lots of different ways that you can address that. But it's just one of many examples of how geography really matters.
Right. And any good digital strategy includes location. Geolocation is a great tool on your site to tailor that experience based on where they're coming from. So, to Dean's point, you can create location page variants based on that location, right? To speak to them, the distance they have to travel or the area that they're in. You also don't want to show people doctors that they can't see, right? So filtering unavailable doctors based on geolocation. There's a number of things that you can do. some of those things, maybe you haven't implemented geolocation. That's something you can tweak. And it's something you want to put into maybe a 6-month window or 6-month or a 12-month backlog. But those are things that you should be, with any good CMS or DXP, you should be able to implement geolocation.
So one of the last examples we'll give here in this particular section, though, is about sources. Now, when I say that, what I really mean is, you might get really excited because you have a tremendous number of referrals coming from a particular web source. Well, one of the nice things about behavioral studies is online, we can take a look at those sources and understand why are they coming, because it may not be for the exact reason that you might have assumed just when you saw that website show up as a referral source. Let me give you a couple of examples. And honestly, the biggest one right on its face is the difference between caregivers and patients doing the searching. In fact, we actually just saw this recently come up with a joint client of ours where, you've got, in some cases, caregivers of aging parents that are likely not in the state. In other words, they're dealing with differences in insurance and availability of docs and things like that, and they're trying to do it from a state away, trying to help their aging parent who has specific issues that they're dealing with. So just that caregiver patient standpoint, as well as also, again, whether that's an aging parent or whether that's a parent of a child, and understanding that and looking for those context clues is super important. Another example might, for example, be Baby Center. So you might get very excited that you have all of these people coming from a site that's a demographically specific deep site like Baby Center. Now, thing is, though, you might want to really do your homework on that and find out who is it that's actually referring. What you might find, for example, is that it may not be the current parent of a young child or a baby or a toddler and who's looking for pediatric care. What you might find, especially as you dig into those birth month groups that are so popular in Baby Center, that these are actually, in some cases, women who haven't given birth yet. So that obviously puts them in a very different universe of things that they need to know right now that are not about pediatric care yet. And so knowing that difference in the context is so huge.
And the beauty of the referring source is that that's a piece of data that any good website should be able to utilize, right? You get that referring source, where they're coming from, and you create content variants based on that source, and you tailor it to their context. So let's look at another scenario here. Let's look at understanding wait time motivation, right? That's a huge topic right now in healthcare, especially as you're competing with so many other folks who can provide things very quickly, very consumer-oriented services. And so wait time is a big factor in decision making. So if you're implementing wait times in your digital experience for the first time, or if you're optimizing it, it's the foundational stage of digital road mapping is the right time to align your people, process, and technology. In other words, that proverbial three-legged stool, right? To do it the right way. And I say that, the people, process, and technology, because there's so many things, right? How does the staff calculate the wait times from being processed to actually being seen by a doctor, right? Your staff has to figure that out. And you've got to bring them into that conversation. How do you best integrate Epic, MyChart, and things like the On My Way widget to get the right balance of wait times and online scheduling? What's the right content and context around wait times, right? And how do you measure accuracy and patient experience? So there's so many things across the people that are involved in these conversations and getting it right, to the technology and the way it integrates, and to the process. So that complex scenario has to be solved in that foundational environment, right? But one of the most important questions, the critical one, is what are the real motivations and behaviors of consumers around wait times? Dean?
Yeah, so wait times, first off, it's not just about your billboard wait times anymore. Sorry, I keep picking on that. It's my favorite thing to pick on, is the idea of a billboard that you have to drive by to find out how long it might take you to get your broken arm fixed. But it's also just not about emergencies. And I think that's the other element I think that we have a tendency to immediately go to from a wait time perspective, because that's often what we see complained about in the reviews that we actually pay attention to. But when we look at the broader behavior online, we'll see that wait times takes the concept of time and wait time, and this idea of time as currency is something much broader that shows up as people talk about their treatment. So it could be everything from the wait time in between tests. It could be about the wait time in between visits. And this idea of what their universe and their life is like. Again, this really is about illustrating the middle part of that consumer journey that we often kind of ignore, and understanding what we can affect in that to say, where are they talking about the wait time? What part of the journey is what they're talking about in regards to wait time, and how can that impact what we want to design digitally to respond to that? Another component of this really is also about influence, right? And so when I say influencer, I don't necessarily mean, Fire Festival influencers or people getting free hotel rooms. Influence takes lots of different shapes and sizes right now. For example, it could be about those condition-specific message boards and that person that doesn't talk often, but when they do, everybody listens, whether it's because they're incredibly erudite or because they've just really been through it and they're considered a real font of knowledge and information. But the thing about the influencer too is that it comes in lots of different packages. So first off, it could be the fact that from a wait time perspective, someone's actually calling from inside the house. They're posting their reviews while they're still in the hospital, right? It's not about someone reflecting on their journey from a specific point or milestone in it. This is about someone who's literally sitting in your ER right now, potentially influencing the next person who's looking for a doc that may have nothing to do with emergency services. But here's someone's review that's being written while they're sitting there. So just that alone is kind of an invitation to do something different from a geolocation standpoint, if you know that it's actually coming from inside the house.
Exactly right, Dean. And using that geolocation, if they're in that area and personalizing the content that might better inform them in that situation, maybe it redirects, tells them they can get free coffee or whatever it might be, right? And it supports them in that stressful and often frustrating moment, right? But that gives you a voice, a way to connect with them in that moment and influence the overall patient experience.
Absolutely. And again, that element of the influencer, you might be surprised at the kind of forms that they take. Now, so for example, in TikTok, one thing we've noticed over the years, but especially in this last 12 months, is the number of, even in rare disease cases, we're seeing, for example, teens and Gen Z, and I'd say even as older as millennial, using TikTok to talk about, for example, how they do infusions of their own meds at home, and not just doing it to show off or in some way just even give a glimpse of their life to other people. They're actually giving a glimpse of their life and how they do their infusions to people with the same diseases. So we're finding those hashtags trending among those people, and we're even seeing them in the comments, not just in the video, but in the comments, people respond to, like how many milligrams, what kind of side effects, and actually getting a conversation with others with the exact same condition. Then we also see then the video reactions to that. And so what you find is this little feedback loop of influencers talking to one another. And again, this is small I influencers, but they're finding this content incredibly valuable and they're not getting it anywhere else. So it's just a great example of watching what those kind of feedback loops, and sometimes it's even geographic based and sometimes it's condition based, but just really being aware of that is super important. Again, as you get a hand around what is the behavior of the people that we're actually targeting. Now, this could be used for lots of different things, and we've just given you a few examples, but I'm sure you could see how in all of these different potential avenues, you could see how insights might beget changes that you might make in the digital roadmap, or even more is how over time you really need to prepare to be able to pivot as you need, right? And add features and whatnot that responds to certain elements in this. But in both of these cases, in all of these cases, what you are seeing though is how this really, chocolate and peanut butter of behavior and the digital roadmap can work together to help you react to the many things that you have to deal with on a daily basis.
So A lot of good information, a lot to absorb. It's often hard to find that next step, that next simple thing you can do, right? And I think that's because this is a treatment plan, but it's not a prescription, right? There's no template, there's no DIY download after this presentation with the 12 steps that you're going to do to to just execute, right? This is different every time because it has to be, because humans are complex and behavior is complex, right? And bringing together, change or navigating change management in an organization is also complex. So there is no exact template for this, right? But there are some fundamental things that you can do to get started on this journey.
Yeah, and I mean, what it really comes down to is stay curious, be curious. In other words, don't just rely on internal anecdotes, don't just rely on older data, hoping that no one's changed since you last took it. Also, don't rely on lagging indicators. And that sometimes might mean surveys that take, a long time to field, a long time to analyze, a long time to get back and really incorporate, but rather take the moments that are necessary to be curious and gather that data so that it can power you through a much more productive and completely better serving website and digital roadmap.
Yeah, and I think also during your road mapping process, you got to be curious about your own team members, right? Your stakeholders are all in this boat with you. They're all knowledgeable. They all care. They want to do great work and create better patient experiences, right? So what are your stakeholders saying to one another? Have you talked to all of them, right? Are you talking to your peers? Your peers are a great channel for you to talk to because they're going through the same things as you, right? So whether it's your stakeholders internally or your peers externally, you really have to be curious and learn from everyone around you in this process and keep an open mind. So you also, in this process, have to find an objective navigator, right? As we've said, digital road mapping and human behavior are complex, and change in prioritization means that you're going to have to kill some of your darlings, make some hard decisions, and probably have a few really tough conversations. And if you're on this journey, especially for the first time, it's a good idea to get a navigator who not only keeps it cool, but is objective, experienced, and willing to tell you the uncomfortable truths, right? Speak truth to power. We were just Dean and I were just at the conference, having beers late one night with a client contact, and they were lamenting that they could not get people to listen and to change their behaviors, and they needed somebody outside to come in and tell them that they needed to change, they could do it better, right? And if they've been there before, they can help you avoid the pitfalls that your peers have made. And they can help you bring those stakeholders on board with a clear business case. So, and I guess, nobody drops everything to work on a digital roadmap. So you also need that navigator maybe to help you with some of the homework to get traction. And lastly, you want to assemble the team, right? Start a dialogue. None of this is going to happen without them. And here are a few questions, you could ask.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, seriously, are your personas stale? Are they, again, how are they created? Really taking a hard look and really make the time to validate them, to make sure that you're starting from the same place, in the right place with the people you actually are trying to attract and retain.
You also want to ask, is your organization operating from a unified digital strategy? I think this is when you start talking to one another in different service lines and departments, and you start realizing that you all have different North Stars. You're all looking at a different point in the sky, and that awareness is the starting point, right? Because if you're not operating from a unified digital strategy, you're going to be going in different places in your organizations. The traction you're going to get is going to be scattered.
I think it's always funny to hear how much emphasis that people put on segmentation and targeting and marketing, and yet they don't take that exact same level of effort and point it at their own website in terms of personalization for the people that they actually capture. And I think that's always, what a massive gap just right off the bat.
So if there's one big takeaway from this entire conversation, it's that one insight implemented is worth 1,000 great ideas, right? And I think that's, we have to have a vehicle to take those insights and create action, right? And that's the rhythm of this peanut butter and chocolate, digital road mapping behavior approach, is that you gain these insights that are human first, human centered, and then you action them, right? And oftentimes I think the mistakes that people make is they try to do everything at one time. They try to take it all on and get it right the first time. But really it should be an evolution, right? And you just need a mechanism, a way to action these insights. And it can be over time. And that's ultimately, that continuous improvement will get you further than any kind of big, heavy lift up front. So, if you have any questions after watching this video, you can reach out to Dean or I. We're happy to open a dialogue and answer any questions. You can also, check us out on social media at these various handles, because we're often out there talking about these things. We love to nerd out about human behavior and digital transformation. So, Dean, anything that you'd like to add to close?
Yeah, just thanks everybody for watching.
All right. Thank you.